members of the Mental Health Advisory Board to the meeting. So I see a number of you are present with us today. So thank you and welcome for joining us. I think initially we need to take the role of the committee. Amy, would you please do that? You're muted.
Sure. We have Hannah Eisner, the chairperson. Susan Schaefer.
Here.
Carla Pohl.
Here.
Corey Tello.
Here.
And Judy Buchanan.
Here.
That's the Board of Health members.
Yeah, it looks like all members of the committee are present, so we have a quorum and we can proceed. And then if you'd like to just identify the members of the Mental Health Advisory Board present, please.
Sure. We have Chief Brian Moore, Faye Freeman Smith, Trisha Malott, Lori Walrab, Dr. Christine Strauss.
And I'm here.
And that is it.
Okay. So our agenda today, and let me just kind of explain, I think procedurally how what we'll do today. We are two bodies represented here. One is the subcommittee of the Board of Health and the other is the Mental Health Advisory Board. And this is a meeting of the subcommittee of the Board of Health. So what I would ask is if any members of the Mental Health Advisory Board would like to, before we begin our meeting, have any comments. I know not all of you were present at our last meeting, or at the joint meeting, but if you have any comments to make, would you please make those now? And then we'll proceed with the committee's discussion. And following that, I think we would then ask for your comments on that. So kind of two parts, but before we begin, if any of you have any comments, we can recognize you to do that at this point. And also I'd note that I think all of you received Corey's wonderful, long, complete, exhaustive document reflecting her own research and kind of summarizing others in terms of needs assessments, programs that are going now, things that need to be considered for future. So thanks to Corey for providing that. I think it's going to be an invaluable tool for us as we move forward. So anybody from the Mental Health Advisory Board wish to make comments at this point in time? Ms. Woolrab.
I think I would just want to echo your comments and thank Corey for that document. It's very helpful. I think it was good to identify, the needs, the new needs, the increased needs of the community, and just want to encourage everybody to consider that as you go forward in your conversation today and your decisions, because I think things have definitely shifted under our feet to some degree. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? No, I'm not seeing any green mics light up for those who aren't visible on video. So with that, I think we will then proceed with our agenda item, which was basically to kind of refine. When we met last, we identified 4 primary funding areas. These reflected kind of a consolidation of things from the prior year's funding priorities to make them more general, broader, with our thought that because we have so many new challenges this year, maybe it would help give people an opportunity to be creative or to come up with, not as directed by us as by the community that's out there. So at the last meeting, we had broken those down into crisis response, a very general youth, adult mental health, and then we called another category we called criminal justice. I sent out to the committee, and I don't know, Amy, if you're able to bring that up at all. I know you had to use another computer, I think, to show the document the shorter document that I created. Is it possible, Amy, for you to show that on the screen for the Mental Health Advisory Board members now? But I had sent to the committee kind of a proposed, very preliminary draft of some statement that we would, of our recommendations to the Board of Health. And those were, following the 4 areas we had identified previously to define crisis response, youth services, adult services. And I renamed criminal justice. We got some recommendations. I renamed it, and we can talk about this too, diversion from and transition out of the criminal justice system. Oops, I'm going back to I'm looking at things and not myself now. So I thought for today's purposes, it might be easier to take this document, and I think as you and the Mental Health Advisory Board can see it now, so you can follow along and just get some feedback. I know Corey had provided me some. It's not reflected in the document on the screen. But just kind of open discussion on this. Did this capture in your mind kind of the idea of where we wanted to go? I think we thought we could put this out, and this might form the basis for a single RFP that could be responded to from programs, either indicating which of these 4 categories, some or all, they might be responding to. And then within that, there is also the provision
And for any professionals that are offering services, but then there could also be education and training for parents and families, and those could be families of adult clients as well as children. So my point under both youth and adult services could be just adding that category of professional development and education.
Okay, yeah, that seemed to make sense to me too. I think that's part of what we think is going to be a need.
Hey,
And
Hannah, this is Christine Strauss. I don't know when you exactly want us to chime in about discussing the programs, if you have a certain designated point for that, or if we're just going about just kind of starting the conversation now about these discussions.
I think at this point, since you can see the document and we're kind of go through it, perhaps section by section, that, if you have comments, please just jump in. I think rather than trying to circle back, it'll get lost in the shuffle. So, I think first of all, we have the 4 categories. Any thoughts on the criminal justice title? Does that give us enough leeway, wiggle room to kind of cover a lot of different kinds of programs, or any thoughts on what we might name that? And Amy, I cannot see the whole document on my screen. Is it? I'm just wanting to make sure that everybody can see everything.
Amy, if you open it as a PDF, will the whole thing show maybe?
I'm going to see if I can do like view one page. And see if I can. Scott, are you giving me some directions on what to do? But I can't go. That's what I was thinking too. This is on one page. It's still missing the bottom piece, but this is one page, but is that too small for you guys to see?
Now, I can actually zoom it on my side, so.
And then there is a little bit more on the second page. Okay, so that's the complete document, if you can see it that way. Is that better for everyone? And then you can zoom it depending on what section you want to see.
Yeah, let's try that anyway. So,
Okay.
If you then click on the little box, once you did that, if you then click on the little box that has an arrow coming out of it, that blows it up on your screen. If you got the people off to the side, the little arrow, the little box that has an arrow in it, if you click that, it blows it up.
Okay, try
sorry,
that.
I can get this distributed. The other option is if somebody has a list that's, well, let's try this and we'll go from there. So first question I have is the criminal justice title. We left that kind of open after our last meeting, not sure what we wanted to name it. I think Susan had offered the term, the specialty courts as a way of defining that. And Susan, the reason I chose this over that is I didn't really necessarily want to link it to the courts as much. If somebody's not court, I don't know, but that
Yeah.
works as well.
Hannah,
So-
I agree with you. This is Christine Strauss. I agree with you. I think that utilizing the term court within the title itself excludes those who have already been sentenced and are being released from IDOC or our inmate populations who have completed their sentence and are being reintegrated within the community. So those essentially, they're no longer part of the court system because if their sentence is complete, they are no longer involved essentially. So, and using the term diversion, although I understand the utilization of the term diversion from essentially falling prey to re-entering the justice system and diverting from essentially reoffending. Diversion to me also rings up with the problem-solving courts. They use the term diversion courts a lot. So that, for me personally, I think that's a little muddied in using that title for this proposal, if that makes sense.
Let me see what Susan has to say and then we can, yes, Susan.
As you know, the funding for, actually it's called drug court, but was agreed upon years ago because of the levy, coming out of the levy, and there is no room in the levy in the county budget to take over that. And so that is why it is in the health department budget. And so that is why I believe we should call it specialty courts, because that agreement still is there. And I think that there's going to have to be a lot of other discussions as to what other way is there to fund it, because that is what was decided many years ago by Chief Judge Robb and other people. So I think that we have to be very careful when we talk about other programs for that money because of that kind of thing.
No, I appreciate that. And Christine, I wasn't quite sure whether, and Susan, I'm not moving from your point. Did you mean that you thought the word diversion muddies what this would be? I wasn't quite sure I followed that. And Susan, I do agree that we have had an ongoing agreement to use a portion of these monies to fund that. It doesn't go through the regular RFP process. That money is just budgeted out of this fund. So there's not been a requirement to submit an RFP from the county for that.
No, I believe it went through the RFP process last year.
It goes through the RFP process. It just used to come through directly from the courts, and it used to come through the providers of the service to
Right.
the recovery courts, and it changed to now it comes from the actual court itself. And so that was the change, but they still do an RFP. While I'm here, I wanted to say, So I think where we've just taken ourselves early in this discussion is we're right back to the dilemma that we face each year. And that is, if we fund recovery courts, which Susan makes the point that that is kind of a guaranteed past practice and agreement between the courts and the county. If that stands, then there's really probably, in my opinion, not much else under this category we should fund, because otherwise a disproportionate amount of dollars allocated for behavioral health would be going to the court system. So if we continue to fund recovery courts, that's a big chunk of our money. And if we added more to that, then it would really be unbalanced in terms of what else we funded besides anything related to courts and justice system. So I would love other people to comment on that.
Well, and before we get too far into that, Corey, I think we had already decided that at this point, we're not talking about the allocation of the dollars as much as the focus areas. And that's the next hurdle. And I think that's a big hurdle we're going to have to cross as to how we look at dividing the pie. But for today's purposes, I think we want to get something that the county board can agree that these would be the focus areas for the grants. And you're right. I mean, every decision we make on this, it impacts another area in terms of the dollars that we have available. Let me suggest this. So right now it looks like we have either the specialty courts, which is Susan's suggestion for that category. The title I put in here, I don't think we had any other. Okay.
Hannah, I made some submissions to Amy last week, utilizing the term bridging, or I know Agent Dittmer, who I think is actually on the call right now from our mental health board. She encouraged the term of trying to utilize the term reintegration program or something with reintegration in the title. Again, keeping it away from the court system in general.
Okay, so I think what we have basically here, and you know, I guess this is where our two groups are going to have to work somewhat separately, is that I think the desire of the Mental Health Advisory Board sounds like something that would be a broader category than just court-involved individuals. And as Susan on our committee has suggested, there has been an ongoing agreement to fund specialty courts, and that might be, we have to decide whether we recommend something to the county board that simply focuses on specialty courts, taking your Mental Health Advisory Board's suggestion into consideration. So what does the committee think? And I'm addressing myself to the Board of Health Committee now, and as far as your wishes on this particular category. I mean, I don't think that the category name excludes the funding of specialty courts, Susan. It just, obviously it implies that there may be other programs out there as well.
What I don't want to have happen though is that, so last year, and I know, Hannah, we're not supposed to get into funding right now, but the amount we typically give for recovery courts is $209,000. So, which is a big portion of our entire amount. And if we continue to fund recovery courts, what I do not want to do is imply to people that might be going for this that there would be big opportunities to cover other justice involved people or systems or needs, because I would hate for somebody to waste a lot of time doing an RFP that we were not ever going to really fund. So I know I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but I think this continues to be an issue of, you know, Susan may be right that calling it recovery courts might be more honest in terms of how the funding could actually be available and allocated. So I don't think we want to mislead or misguide people.
Anybody else on the committee? Judy?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to sign out for a minute, and I'm not sure, Corey may have just made my point. Are we still talking about the criminal justice system item?
Yes.
Okay.
Or what
And
we
I think
call that.
Corey's points were well taken, because if we were to utilize some of the content with that topic, we might raise the expectation that we are going to approve and fund more than we have previously, because we do have a history of funding just a specific area. And I would not want to create the impression that we are perhaps thinking of being able to fund more than that. So that was just my point.
Okay. Carla, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree. I agree with Susan and Judy that if we're, I mean, given our budgeting restrictions, that maybe we need to just call that specialty courts.
Okay. All right. So I think at this point, what our committee is recommending is that that fourth category be called specialty courts. And as long as we're there, obviously the language of that is sort of suggests broader programming. So do we want to just call it specialty courts and then just take out any reference to any other kinds of programs? I mean, obviously specialty courts are referred to in there. The second is to provide a continuum of mental health care within and upon release. That's not counter to what specialty courts do. I don't know that.
Hi. This is Agent Dittmer. Can I throw in my 2 cents real quick?
Yes.
If you have to use specialty court, can you just throw reintegration in with it? Special and reintegration or something like that?
Maybe the way to handle this is we will call the category specialty courts, but within the description of specialty courts, I think that they are certainly geared towards a successful reintegration. So
Okay.
I think we could use those words in the description of specialty courts that we could maybe say programs include, I'm not quite sure, since we're calling it specialty courts, whether we need anything more than that. So open any thoughts?
This is Christine again. I'm sorry for any ignorance they might have about the history of this topic, but I am generally confused. Is this going to remain? I thought this proposal was for post-conviction, post-sentence individuals not involved in a particular program who need continuity of care for psychiatric services or mental health services, if that was going to be included. And that's what I think that the reintegration that we're focusing on and the diversion that's where I'm getting confused, is this not being for the problem-solving courts or specialty program or specialty courts participants. So if this is something that I just need clarification on, that this is not a separate proposal and this falls under the specialty courts, because that eliminates all of the individuals that were discussed at the last meeting, as far as those who are either current inmates up for release back to going back into the community, or those who have already been in the Illinois Department of Corrections or being released from prison, either on parole or serving their sentence, who need to have some kind of bridge psychiatric or mental health services to reduce the recidivism rates, to stop people reentering back into the justice system. So if this is not a separate entity, that's where I guess I'm being confused, or I'm getting confused as to, we're calling it diversion, we're calling it specialty courts, because it has to be under the encompassing of that funding, versus having this being a separate proposal for separate bridging of psychiatric care, which is where I was under the assumption we were going with this program, or proposal, I should say.
And I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in. I think how I would answer that question is this, is I think that yes, by use of specialty courts, I think we are narrowing it to those programs. But I think that maybe we need to look at when we describe adult services or other program areas, that we include bridging programs in those. So in other words, specialty courts may just be a special carved out because of we've traditionally funded those problem-solving specialty courts. We have to live with our history. I see your hand up, Judy. Yeah, just a moment.
Yeah.
And that maybe within the adult services description, we include more with respect to those individuals needing the bridging and help as they leave prison or jail. So, Judy.
Yeah, no, thank you. And our previous participant, I think the bridging activity for those who need that reentering the community, I mean, no one can fault the great need there, but I would suspect, although I don't know for sure, that would be a larger population than specialty courts. And we've had the history with specialty courts and a degree of success. I appreciate Hannah's comment relative to the bridging in adult psychiatric as we look at that, because we have to be very mindful of the dollars we do have, and again, not set up an expectation that we're going to be able to fund a much larger population unless we want to take a look at the other focus areas and somehow make them far less than we, at this point, I think, expect them to be.
So would you be able to, Christine, or somebody out there, come up with some additional language under adult services? So the examples were not intended to be exclusive, but I think they help make people think about what could be done. That would be an example of a description of the type of program you're talking about. I know it's not a single program, but a general idea of that kind of program.
Absolutely. I've actually sent in some detail information regarding some of these bridge programs that I've worked with in the past in county jails, especially much less IDOC, that is not extremely complicated. It would take obviously some work, as anything does, getting it off the ground and getting used to new services, but working with the language and working with some ideas, absolutely. I've sent some of that already, some of those ideas over to Amy to see if any of those services currently exist within the county, and they don't, from my understanding. So I have no problem. I'm passionate about this area, no problem working with the board as much as possible to be able to put some of this in action, or at least put the proposal up to vote for action at minimum.
Right, and what we're doing here is, what we're trying to do is give categories of identify kind of focus areas, and within that certain need areas within those. So if you could come up with at the end of adult services where it says examples of programs include, I think at the end of mental health first aid training, some descriptor of those types of programs, bridging programs. I don't have the language, but I bet you do. So maybe you could think about that and give us something to add to that adult services category that's more specific to. So if somebody's looking at this saying, what are the funds out there, it would say, okay, that there would be some consideration of that kind of proposal.
Got it.
Okay, great. So we will then, I think the agreement is we will call Category 4 specialty. I guess we could call it problem-solving courts, specialty courts. I don't know that it's, I think here we refer to them in this county as a group, as specialty courts. So I think we should use that term. And so I think if we go up, then maybe we'll start now at the top. Crisis response, comments. And I would say I wrote this. I am not a mental health professional, so if I've used incorrect wording, language, etc., please correct anything that needs to be corrected or clarified to make sure we're saying what we mean. Okay. Yes, Susan, I see Judy, your mic is green. Do you have something to say or you just don't?
No, just, I mean, this identifies a very broad category and where we indicate it's not limited to the following types of services. Many of those are full-blown programs on their own. So I think, again, if our intent is to make sure that we have that response to the crisis from professionals that are prepared to do it, when they get the call, we need to be sure that our language is such that it really emphasizes that kind of a response and what they will do with the response. I like all these others, but I see them as cooling off centers and first responder training. I would suspect that if we are to truly fund crisis response in terms of having staff available 24/7, that might say that if we think these other points are valid and worthy of being determined as focus, that we should be looking at them in a separate way.
I'm not sure. I wonder if we're still having a little trouble understanding how these proposals are going to go out. Are we wanting them to be large enough so that people can like kind of design based on their expertise, like what is most relevant out for this particular broad category? So we're wanting to leave it pretty broad, or are we wanting to try to narrow these down somewhat? I think we all need to be on the same page.
And Corey, I hear you, and that's a good point too. I think that the first sentence where it's provide immediate short-term response to acute behavioral health episodes, which could, depending upon which team decides to respond to this, could include in these others. So I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm.
Susan.
Okay, two things. On crisis response, yeah, it's not just necessarily one. I mean, when we put out this RFP, my understanding is that there can be multiple entities providing responses to crisis response for funding requests. And so that it's not just like what you would think of like mobile crisis, and that it's not limiting to that. And so I think that we would end up getting multiple responses to this section of the RFP under crisis response. That's my understanding. And I think that that's what we're looking for. And I kind of hope that answered your question or your comment, Corey, about it's broad, it's a broad topic, but we'll get multiple different responses to that.
And okay. No, thanks, Susan.
I thought we
take
left
back-
the last meeting with the idea that we wanted to have something that was not as specifically defining programs and
Mm-hmm.
see what we get.
No, I take back my original observation. I'm outside the box now.
Okay. Yeah, and the only thing else I would add to that is just Hannah, where you got the very last sentence where you got law enforcement / first responder training, evaluation, cooling off centers. I think cooling off / stabilization, because I mean, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get them while they're in the midst of the crisis, you're trying to get them stabilized so they can, go back to a less restrictive setting while waiting for the next, while getting linked to ongoing support.
So
So
probably
stabilization is probably a good word.
it's a better word than cooling off.
Yeah, probably.
And then I would like to,
De-escalation, maybe a de-escalation instead of cooling off.
Yes, de-escalation is good too. Yeah. That could
So-
all be there. I mean, it could be de-escalation, stabilization, because all of that is what has to occur while you're moving them out of the crisis mode back to so that they can be maintained until more lower level services can kick in, or not lower level, but services of a non-crisis orientation. And I would ask here if Chief Fleischner's on, or if Brian Moore's on. I don't know, Brian, do you have anything to say about this? Because I know you're certainly one of these responders.
I don't think I have anything to add. I mean, I think you've covered everything with this.
Thank you.
Great.
I'd like to also make a comment about, you have prevention programs, and I'm not sure that we want to do prevention programs in crisis response, because to me that is, I mean, suicide awareness, yes, possibly, but to me, prevention is not short-term crisis, acute, that's just kind of my thoughts. To me, that maybe prevention programs could be more in the youth services and actually maybe in some adult services.
I agree.
Okay, so we're saying we take out suicide awareness prevention program completely, or just suicide, remove the, just call it suicide prevention?
I would just say, just leave suicide awareness and then take the words prevention programs out of that and put those in the other, the youth and the adult. Because like I said, prevention programs, to me, and in my mind, are more long-term type things, not short-term.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
it's just those two words,
Yeah, so, okay. I am,
Prevention you offer to a large group of people that maybe aren't even, having any symptoms at all at the moment, and you're just giving them tools that they might use in the future. And so I agree with Susan that prevention probably is not, I mean, it's a nice thing to think about continuum, but it probably belongs under youth services or adult services.
okay, so we'll just leave that as suicide awareness? Or do you want to just remove the reference? I hate to take the word suicide out of it, but I mean.
How about suicide response there? How about crisis hotline, crisis response team, suicide response, or something like that? Because again, once they're in an acute crisis, it's not that they're just, you're not talking to them about, general principles related to not letting your depression get out of control and reaching to a suicidal level.
Mm-hmm. Everybody good with that? Suicide response to take out awareness prevention program?
Mm-hmm. Right.
We've changed cooling off to stabilization and de-escalation. So that would be crisis response. Any other comments, changes that anybody wants to make? Okay, youth services. And I know, Corey, you had indicated professional development as part of this. Anybody else have any?
And I would just add professional development / education, because it doesn't have to be a professional. In other words, it could be training, education for parents and families. So, and professional development implies you're a professional, and it can also be for the families and parents who may be professionals, but in another profession.
So where did you put this? Examples, under examples, or outpatient psych, treatment, counseling, family focus, early intervention programs, embedded school programs, mental health first aid, and then add professional.
Well, I would put, instead of mental health first aid, I would put professional development and education / training. And then you could give mental health first aid as an example of that. Mental health first aid is just one example of education and training.
Any thoughts on that?
This is Faye, and I will add, instead of just embedded school programs, embedded school and college programs. I don't see where we're addressing, like mental health first aid done at Heartland or ISU or so. I think embedded school programs is detailed and specific. So if you do just school programs, it doesn't address higher ed.
Okay, so what are the types of programs And, I think your comments last time in the group meeting were great, Faye. And so I think it sort of educated me on that particular area, which I don't think we have looked at much.
Well,
But
for
That
instance,
program in the K through 12, I think looks different than it would be in higher ed. So I'm not sure what you'd call that.
so like programs with NAMI on campus and the mental health first aid to college students. So to help, so I don't see that in the wording. If it's embedded school programs, schools usually, like you say, is from K to 12, but maybe embedded school college programs, or leave the school out and just say education program. I'm not sure.
Okay. Would some of that fall under what Corey has suggested, adding the professional
Yeah,
development?
professional development and education training. And that would be across the spectrum of either professionals or families, or you're right, or students themselves. So it could be so instead of mental health first aid, we're replacing that with professional development and education/training. Does that make sense, Faye? And then that covers the gamut of for anybody under this category. So it could be for the clients themselves, it could be for the parents or families of those clients, and it could be for the professionals that are treating them.
Okay, I see how that's included, but that would also be included with the K to 12. But since you have a specific language with embedded school programs, it separates out any college programs.
She's changing it. So the mental health first aid would say, instead of that, it would say professional development and education/training. So that would cover for college kids.
So Faye, and this is just kind of, how would something look if Heartland were to submit a request for funding under this category? And of course, this is under 21, it would cover the Heartland students. What type of program would you be seeking to get funding for? Just help describe how we put that in there.
Well, right now we don't give counseling services to the College Now program, which is a lot of the Unit 5 and District 87. So that's about 2,000 students. We don't have the capacity, but since you have embedded school programs, that's considered a program. We're drawing a lot of Unit 5 and District 87 students who need counseling. I've had parents call me and say, because my student is going to Heartland, do they get the counseling services? And we have to say no, because we don't have the capacity or funding. So that would be a funding that we would need to address the youth that's coming from Unit 5 and District 87.
So are those students that are duly enrolled?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so why couldn't they get their services through the embedded school program at their high school?
Because of the capacity of the need. And so that's why the parents are calling us, because they're at Heartland and we can't because of the same reasons.
So are they at Heartland what percent of the day?
I wouldn't know. I would have to call the College Now program, but they, it depends on how many AP courses they're taking.
Okay. Okay, so that's a great point. We need to follow up and figure out where that's breaking down, because it would seem to me if there's an embedded therapist in their high school, they should be, they should be eligible to receive that. But your point is there's simply not enough capacity.
Right. Maybe it needs to be
they'd be eligible, but they're not. Okay. Thank you.
And once again, this is a broad category. So for example, it's intended to fund counseling programs. So if there was one that was specifically focused on students who are, taking college classes and are, they may have a different type of issue than the kid who's still struggling with discipline in the classroom in their high school. I mean,
Okay, I just got a comment from, I hope Mark doesn't mind. Mark Jontry, the regional superintendent of education, is watching us. And he just commented to me that those services should be given to them at their high school.
Okay.
So that we should be addressing that problem through working with the high school, with Unit 5 and District 87, rather than adding a whole nother layer of service. And that makes sense to me, because we need to figure out how that, but I'm so glad you brought that to our attention, Faye. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Judy.
Yeah, and thank you, Faye, that's a good point. I would not be supportive of removing the language mental health first aid, because as I'm listening to this, families and individuals not knowing where to go or what to do, I would think that mental health first aid being provided on our college campuses, and for those parents that are local, they could attend with their student, or the students at least have the opportunity. Because I think mental health first aid is designed to do some of this education and identifying how to not only identify, not to treat, but how to respond. So I would encourage us to leave mental health first aid in there.
And
Okay.
Judy, I'm not saying get rid of it, I'm saying broaden it, because there's other education and professional development topics that are very critical, like restorative justice, for example, right, which is a wonderful program that has that's being offered through the Regional Office of Education and through the Regional Alternative School. And it really speaks to some of the issues we're talking about with how, I mean, it's a very broad-based education program, and gets at things about when two kids are in conflict with each other, and or when a student is breaking disciplinary guidelines. It's an approach to help them kind of rethink. It's almost a little bit like moral recognition therapy, like that we do in the courts, where you kind of help them think about their thinking and make better decisions. So my point is, we could list a whole bunch of those. And so I think, Judy, we can list mental health first aid as an example, and I like leaving it there, but I'm just suggesting let's broaden that to cover other professional development and education training programs, so we don't just limit ourselves to as if mental health first aid is the only psychology education training piece. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
I like it as an example because it's a very important one.
Okay. Susan, you had mentioned earlier when we took suicide prevention out, that we might want to move that to some of these other categories. So I'm looking at youth services, and the language now talks about geared towards long-term mental health care as opposed to crisis. Such programs include helping them identify issues earlier in life. Should we have a prevention category in there? Again, this is my lack of expertise here. Is it appropriate to talk about preventative measures in mental health?
I think this is where, well, either that or the examples of programs, because we want to, when it comes to services, we want to prevent as many as possible before they actually get to needing the embedded school counselor or any kind of crisis response kind of thing. So to me, when you educate youth in prevention and actually identification of potential issues that they or their friends may have, then this is where, one of the things with the health department, we want to get into prevention as much as we can, and that back to the tier 1 kind of type thing in this, and that starts very young. So that's why I wanted the prevention in there.
Yeah, so that second sentence of this sort of says somewhat what you just said. I didn't know if we needed more than that.
I totally agree with Susan. If we do not include prevention, we are not thinking in terms of a continuum, and then we are really we're derelict in our responsibilities to make sure that there's a full continuum of services available in each of these.
Program description that we could put in examples include, and of course we put outpatient psychiatric and counseling, family focused early intervention programs, embedded school And we have the
You could
professional,
put home visiting programs because those are very evidence-based early intervention programs. This home visiting where you actually work with parents in the home to show them how to be good parents in every aspect of the word, and also provide resources to the families to become healthier families in general, healthy and more mentally healthy.
wouldn't that fall under the family-focused early intervention program as a general? Should we just put suicide prevention programs as one of the examples in here? Thoughts?
I think it's actually more than just suicide prevention. When
So-
you,
Yeah.
I mean, when you think, well, we've funded in the past, when it's, like too good for drugs, because drugs then cause, or are used as a, substitute for treatment on mental health issues. So I think that we really have to have the word prevention in there.
Okay, I mean, there is the word in the earlier description, it says we will be geared toward providing longer term. Such programs help youth and families identify mental health issues earlier in life, educate them on the underlying causes of these mental health issues, and help them develop coping skills to manage them, provide psychiatric treatment, link youth and families in need of mental health treatment and intervention with appropriate services. So,
But for prevention, you're really just making sure that you are providing an environment that is conducive to healthy physical and mental and psychological development. So maybe something along the lines of help families create environments that promote healthy mental health or something like that, promote healthy physical and mental health.
what if we put in that second sentence, they will be geared towards providing long-term mental health care to younger individuals, including preventive services? So we have the word prevention in there.
Do you still want it then to say, though, as opposed to crisis response?
We could take that out. I mean, I think it was just to differentiate it from crisis so that we know crisis is one thing, but I don't know that we need to state
Right.
that.
So we've covered that. Okay.
So if we just said long-term mental health care and prevention services.
It could be prevention, education, because that is part of a good part of prevention is education and awareness. And again, like I said, it could also be something related to development of healthy development of family environments that create, healthy development, psychological and physical development. Because that really is true prevention. You're making sure that they're raised in an environment that, is going to allow them to develop good skills. And you know what, can I also ask, Mark Jontry, as an audience member, is telling us that the volume is not it's hard to hear. So he's wondering if the person in charge of this, Scott, if you could somehow make the volume turn up a little bit on your end for our audience. Okay.
I have to concur. It's sounding okay from my end as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I make a quick comment about the early intervention? I would just be mindful of using the term early intervention because then that could be confusing with like the state's early intervention program for kids 3 and under. So I don't think we're looking at just kids 3 and under. I think it's more of like early prevention versus early intervention.
Okay, so let me track this back here a minute. I think on the first part where we have said they will be geared toward that second sentence, it would read providing long-term mental health care prevention and awareness to younger individuals. We will strike as opposed to crisis. And now, Amy, you're saying in the latter part where we say family-focused early intervention, you are suggesting family-focused intervention / prevention programs?
I wouldn't use, yeah, I definitely wouldn't use early intervention because then that gets confused with the 3 and under. I would say maybe family-focused prevention programs. Or you could say family-focused intervention and prevention programs.
Right. I think that's good. Mhm.
Okay.
Prevention.
So you know, I have the Word document here. I'm making the changes as we're talking, so otherwise it's hard to track in the notes, but so, okay, so does that then take us through youth services? Any other comments, changes? Yes, Susan?
Since I think we're kind of done with this section, this kind of ties into the adult services because on both of them, you have an age limit here. You know, who are under 21, and then with the adults, you have over 21. And we have providers that do both. And so I'm concerned about making sure that they're not necessarily going to have to put in 2 RFPs if they provide services for age groups that are under 21, and then also they provide services for age groups over 21, that they would then end up putting 2 RFPs in for that kind of thing, if depending upon how rigorous we're going to do this. And so I'm just kind of want to make sure that we don't get into some of those process issues that, you know, people are going to be confused on that kind of thing if they do overlap on their services.
Well, my thought, and I thought as a group, we thought that we might have a single RFP that allows applicants to indicate which of these 4 categories they are applying under. So somebody could, in my mind, submit one that would include youth and adult if they serve both populations.
Okay, because I was under the impression that if we had one RFP and there had 4 sections, you would apply for youth if you do ones under 21, but then if you also do adults, you would then have to apply again under adult services because it's over 21 and not be a combined type of thing. That's my thought was how that would work on that, instead of saying I'm applying for youth and adult services, you know, because whatever I do contains both. And that's why I'm questioning this and having those hard and fast numbers in there.
I agree with Susan, because I'm afraid if we get lots of combined ones that like cover like all 4 areas, it's going to be hard for us to tease out. Like if we're trying to compare apples to apples, it might be hard then to say, well, we want to fund this section of this one, but not this section. And the same thing of another one, we want to fund this part, but not that part. I think it might be cleaner if we ask people to just file separately under each category.
Well, and I think we can cross that bridge.
Yes, yeah, we can later. You're right.
Point then is by using age limits. Actually, it wouldn't. And if somebody wants to submit for both populations, then they'd have to submit 2 RFPs. I mean, I think the area where we know this happening, for example, in the current Center for Human Services, I think clients up to 14, I think, is their cutoff. So they would hit the youth service age. So they might be serving 2 populations. They're essentially a similar program, but so I'm open. I don't know how we define youth. I think
the issue that often happens is like from a education perspective, defining youth, it's, often, the adult part kicks in once they graduate from high school, unless they are a student with a disability. And that's when those high school level services can continue up to the day before their 22nd birthday. And so that's why when you think about youth, you have to go up to 21 because you want to make sure you're including youth with disabilities. But, technically kids who graduate from high school, with quote, no disabilities, they typically kind of almost fall into that adult category after 18. So that's why it always gets a bit muddy.
So,
but usually for anything related to do with providing services, it goes up to 21 under youth.
So Susan, did you have thoughts on how to define youth? Or I see Judy, your green light's coming on, so Susan?
Yeah, that's why I kind of almost wanted to take the actual numbers out as an age to understand what, you know, we all know what youth is, and I think all the providers know what youth is. And, you know, when we do this, people aren't going to say a 23-year-old is still a youth, you know, kind of thing. And to reference what Corey said about up to their 22nd birthday, you know, yeah, we know that. And so we would consider that youth because of that, if it had that specific issue with what they were asking for funding. So that's why I kind of almost on both of them don't want to have an age in there, because I think that muddies the water on what some of the things that Corey just said. Yes, at 18, you're an adult, you know, so it's not, you wouldn't be covered under, you know, if you're trying to get outpatient services of any kind, you might be covered under your parents' insurance, but you're not covered, you know, you're considered an adult at that point, and parents can't get information about you. So that's why I almost would like to take the age out of both of those.
I mean, I guess my question is, how then do we just, I mean, I kind of disagree with you, and I think that probably agencies who work with this, I'm assuming there are ages written into programs that are geared. I think we can't just say we know what youth means. We need some way of describing it. I don't know, Judy, did you have a suggestion?
I think I'm agreeing with you, Hannah, in that I believe that the individuals under 21 and the individuals over 21, I think that needs to stay there. And if an organization chooses to, I would recommend separate responses to our request for proposals, rather than one that happens to serve both. Because I think for those of us in a reviewing capacity and making recommendations, it's going to be clearer how our youth are being served and how our adults are being served. And then secondly, under adult, are we wanting to, in the second line of the content, change as opposed to crisis response with the words prevention and awareness, as we did with youth?
Sure.
Since we dealt with crisis response in an earlier category.
I think it makes sense to me.
And just for the record, in the mental health action plan, we did define juveniles. We used the word juveniles and defined it as 21 and under.
Mm-hmm.
So just to be consistent.
Yeah, and I guess, certainly I understand the special needs population, and I would hope that we are going to be amenable to working with an organization that might wonder under which category they submit that, and they could justify their reasoning accordingly in their submission to us. Because I think if we leave them out, we create a whole list of questions in terms of what you mean by youth and what you mean by adult.
Right, okay.
Okay, so my question still comes back to, though, on the adult, you know, I can go with youth services on, you know, and have an age in there. But on the adult, I'm still concerned about the age being in there because of the age you are an adult for health reasons.
So you would propose that to be 18?
I would prefer it to be at least 18. Yeah, if you're going to have if you want to have an age in there, I would prefer to be 18, because that is the legal thing. Is that
Not
Carla
in mental health. No, that's not correct. If you are seeking mental health services, you can sign your own consents, just like pregnancy, and the parents do not have a right to look at your records, regardless of your age.
Regardless of your age.
Over the age of 12, you can self-refer for mental health. Same thing with pregnancy. You don't have to have a parental consent to get STI services or pregnancy services. They're all in the same boat.
So would those,
Statute ready, but
so would those who are over the age of 12 then be considered adults on services then, Carla? Because I don't know
No.
that, kind of thing.
don't,
It'd still be youth
don't
services?
mix, no, don't mix those words up. That it's really specific. They're not adults. They can only get mental health services, STI services, sexually transmitted infections, contraception, and pregnancy services without a parental consent. They're not adults, they're not emancipated. None of that terminology applies to those 4 services.
And I
Okay.
think
So-
maybe-
I vote we table this discussion and make sure we look at all the legal definitions and just let's save this for another time. And let's make sure we've checked all the statutes and everything that relate to age and let's finish this later because it seems like this is, an important point, but we don't want to spend a lot of time on it right now.
well, and Corey, I appreciate that, but I think that in raising that, I think we are losing sight of why did we carve youth and adult services apart? It wasn't who can consent to treatment or whether your insurance covers it. We see this population as needing a different type of service.
Right.
And the age of that person probably isn't that critical to that. I mean, I get what you're saying, Susan. 21 is just a magical number. But I think it's intended to say, we know youth, for example, they could learn early on, they can get preventive services maybe in a way that will help them as adults, whereas adults are starting at a different point. So I think that was why we created 2 categories. And I don't want to get too bogged down in which law describes them as what, because we'll never get an answer out of that. We could certainly say as a general rule, but obviously it could vary depending on each individual. My thought is I'd like to leave the age there. As we put out an RFP, this is just for the county board to say we think these are good ways to divide up the issues. When we get to writing the RFP, we may be able to put some language in that RFP that allows some room, for example, acknowledging that some places may serve clients of 14 years of age, so that we don't make it harder for people to apply. But I think Judy's point about seeing what people are doing in these various 2 populations.
And I'm also, I think Amy Hancock. Amy, does this make sense in terms of you will be putting a lot of the language together for the RFP, making the distinction of under 21 and over 21? Does that seem reasonable, or do you think that's going to create problems or raise more questions than we anticipate?
So I think for the most part that the programs I'm thinking of, they either provide services to the youth or they provide services to adults. And the youth could be up to 21 years of age. And then maybe they go on to an adult program, but that's going to look very different than like the youth program. And then even with like the adult program, we have adult psychiatry that currently serves kids ages 12 and up. And so I think it's good to have the age identified on the youth. But as far as the adult services, I think that it could create some barriers to have the age on there.
Amy, what about if we
I
were
definitely
to,
think 21 is too old. If we do have an age, 21 is definitely too old for adult services because there's people under the age of 21 that would need to access adult services.
Are they different than adults? Aren't they treated as a youth, even though they go in and just like, okay, you're the same as a person who's 35 getting treatment?
Well, I mean, everybody's experience would be individualized. And so it might be the same process, the same protocol, but their process is going to be individualized. So they're not, a 12-year-old would be treated the same as a 35-year-old when they're talking to a psychiatrist, or their family can be involved or whatever.
Judy, you had your hand up.
I'm asking a question here that probably the lawyers would could debate. And that is where it refers to individuals who are over 21 years of age. With the word, injecting the word may, who may be over the age of 21 years, does that allow for those kind of exceptions that Amy is referring to?
Hey, is Dan, Deneen, out there? Dan, do you have any comments about it from, because I know you are in the middle of, advocating for people that probably fall into that gray area. Any comments from your end of it?
I don't think he's on. And here's
Yeah, I
my
don't think he joined us.
is that we leave this language in to take to the county board, and we can further consider it at the county board level. It's difficult because I think we are doing two things here. One is we're slipping down into thinking about individual programs, and what I think we need to be doing is thinking about the broader category of what these mean. And generally, yes, on an individual level. So I think, if you want to wordsmith, so it's who are 21 years of age or older in most cases, some way to modify that. Yes, Judy.
And just for a point of clarification, I'm here referencing to getting this drafted and getting our language formalized, presenting it to the county board, or are we talking about presenting it to the Board of Health?
I'm sorry, the Board of Health. If I've been saying county board, I was misspeaking.
Just for those who might be listening in and may not be clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
It's an action item on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess for purposes today, are people comfortable with leaving it, and everybody can go back and think a little more on how we might? I think we need to be able to distinguish who we mean by youth and adults, and age is one way to do it. There may be another way, and it does conform with the action plan, as you said, Corey, to define youth as that age, and adults are just not youth. So, and I think,
and yet I understand Amy Hancock's point too, that for many things in our country, 18 is the legal adult, the age of where you are considered a legal adult for some different activities and things. So it does get muddy. So let's just do a little bit more exploration.
so I think we're in adult services. Judy, I did take your comment in terms of removing the reference to crisis response and making this mirror what we did with the youth services. So more comments.
Hannah, would it help if it was just called psychiatric services, or is that too narrow?
We hadn't gone there from our last meeting, so I think
Or mental health services? I'm just trying to, then you wouldn't have to worry about the age.
I don't know what the group. I prefer just staying with the adult services, and we can
okay.
figure out the age issue. I am sure.
Because
I'm happy with that.
it's more than
Just make it 18 then.
And I would also make the same changes we made under youth services to that under mental health first aid, use that as an example and make that broader to professional development and education/training for professionals and families. Because again, you may have, an adult child that the family needs to be involved with, or you may have a spouse with mental health issues that the family needs to be provided education. So, and then use mental health first aid as an example of that kind of idea.
basically these two could read exactly the same, just with our friend 21 years of age in there.
Yeah, but they're not exactly, okay. Mm-hmm.
And I would also put whatever you put in for suicide above, I would add that in this too, because again, certainly we do the ending the silence for not just youth, but ending the silence has also been offered to adult groups as well. So again, but that again could fall under education training. So maybe there doesn't need to be something separate for suicide education.
What's the feeling of the group? So if I'm just putting this all together, what we'll do is examples of
Under the-
programs. We will add, basically make that the same set of programs that we've listed under the youth category. And I don't think we put suicide prevention specifically in the youth category. So do we want to add another example of a program with being suicide prevention in both? Are you following me?
Where is suicide prevention? Where's the language that?
It's not. That's what I'm saying. We didn't do it. So I think we need to add that, I think.
Either that, or again, once we do that, I'm so sorry, I sound like such a broken record. If we do that piece about professional development and education/training, we could put as examples, you know, including education prevention of suicide, you know.
Mhm. And that gets the word prevention in there again. But the wording of youth services and adult services in some cases will be the same, but particularly the latter two sentences in youth will be unique to that category. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yes. So on
And
adult,
Hannah,
yes,
Hannah, following up on the task that you wanted me to think of a way to
for adult training. Great. Thank you.
include the bridging
You are breaking up.
program under the adults. Services, okay?
I'm sorry. Chris-
Continuity of psychiatric and mental health care, or continuity of psychiatric and mental health services post-incarceration release.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah. Content.
okay, am I saying it?
Say it again. Continuity of psychiatric care. Post.
Continuity for psychiatric and mental health. Continuity for psychiatric and mental health care, or if you wanted to use the word services,
Okay.
whichever word you felt the board feels more comfortable with, post-incarceration release.
Okay. I got it.
Okay, and then the other designation that I wanted to make, or just a comment that I wanted to make, is that we were talking, or someone was talking briefly about the terminology of psychiatric and is it all encompassing? Actually, psychiatric is going to imply some type of medication management. So if we include psychiatric and psychological services, or psychiatric and mental health or behavioral health services, because if we just stick to psychiatrics, that's insinuating there's some type of medication management involved.
Okay. Where are you? I'm not tracking where this is going in the document.
No, I'm just providing some explanation. Someone commented, I think it was was it Carla that said, should we just include the word psychiatric under services? And what I'm saying is there's a distinction between psychiatric and psychological. Psychiatric only implies some type of medication being involved.
Right. Yeah. No. And I think that's why we decided not to
I was just,
do psychiatric, but adult services, so we could be broader in terms of the type of services.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. It says mental health issues and management, and then it also includes psychiatric treatment, but it doesn't exclude other types.
Yeah, I agree. It should be adult services because, you know, if we're looking at potentially different kinds of counseling, it would fall into adult services, but they don't necessarily need medication and need a psychiatrist. They just might need some counseling.
But
That's kind of where I thought we were at after that last meeting.
right, I mean, either both youth and adult psychiatric follow-up or services implying perhaps medication and medication management, I think is appropriate for both, but not to the exclusion of behavioral health counseling or treatment.
Right.
That's a broader category.
Okay, so adult services, any other changes, additions for that one? And what I'm going to do is I've been making these changes in my document. When we're done today, I'll go ahead and email them out to everybody, and I will include, I'm sorry, the Mental Health Advisory Board. We have this as an action item on our Board of Health meeting Wednesday. And I don't think, because we've just developed this today, this will be distributed to the board prior to the meeting. So anybody who wants to make additional changes or just reread what we've done and make sure it's correct, please do so with a quick warning. So this won't be the last one.
Sorry, can I make a quick suggestion that on adult services, could that include some type of language too about like family services? So it could maybe be like, if it's a couple going that's having mental health, and so like they're still going to the same place, or if it is a family that they all need some type of mental health services, they would be able to access that versus just like and so to support the situations where it's not just individual needs.
And you're speaking of in connection with that individual who's presenting for mental health treatment, that if there's a family with that individual, that they be included? We're not talking
Yeah,
just,
so if that would be appropriate, then the family would be included. So then that way, you know, if
Where do you suggest putting that, Amy? As just give me
under
some.
under adult services.
Yeah, where? Just give me something to put in here and I'll type it in.
Sure. Just like family mental health treatment.
So what we have now is examples of programs are outpatient psychiatric, and we're adding the professional development to that. So professional development.
Education training, don't forget education training.
Yes, I got that.
and are we wanting to imply here that this is the adult services are for an individual, or are we saying that we're going to be doing family counseling as well as a separate service?
Well, we could also be doing marital counseling. I mean, you know, adult services come in a variety of things.
And if they are in connection with the adult that has presented for treatment, or if they're not, then that's a whole nother category of services.
I think that that's what I'm asking, and that's what I'm wondering too, Judy. Martha Dittmer brought that up, you know, like that's on the mental health advisory board. Because it doesn't make, kind of like the CAT, like the wraparound, it doesn't make sense to have everyone going to all these different places if that can be avoided. But I think that the word family would not be correct, because then if you have caretaker, or like there's just so many diverse situations where that more than just the one individual could benefit from services. But I feel like the way it's set up now for adult services and youth services is just looking at the individual, not the unit.
And I guess we run, this is not intended to be kind of an exhaustive description of what any program could be. It's supposed to be a more general description.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think if what we're saying is, you know, outpatient psychiatric treatment or counseling, including family or marital, I mean, we could do that, or we just assume that somebody who's applying is going to specify the type of counseling they're providing. This is not intended to limit it. It's just, you know, I think if we try to go into too many of the details, you know, we'll be lost before we know it.
Right. No, I totally agree, Hannah. I'm just thinking, like, if I was an applicant, if I was to read the first sentence, but I take things very literal, but if I was to read the first sentence where it says will be offered to individuals who were over 21, like my clinical brain would just go to individual therapy versus.
Sometimes it's called like systems, like family systems or something like that. I don't know if we want to, I mean, under youth, that family system certainly makes sense to work in, but adult, I'm not sure family systems is the right terminology. Anybody out there that serves adults that has a term that's better than family systems? Because you're right, we definitely, I mean, many years ago, we moved into understanding that if you don't treat the system the individual is in, you're not going to get very good outcomes.
Well, if you want, maybe we can put in both of these in the youth and the family to individuals who are 21 and their families or caregivers. I don't know the other term, so that we're not just saying families, but a spouse is a family, so we don't need to split that out with their
Support systems.
Support systems is fine. So do you want to just put 21 years of age and their and their support, so their families and caregivers,
I'm gonna disagree on this one. I think that yes, we understand that there are families and caregivers that also have to help address this. But I think that we might be losing sight of these are individuals that that are severely and mentally ill, that they themselves really have to be addressed themselves, because a lot of times they don't even have any family or supports. And so I kind of disagree with broadening this on that, but that's my opinion.
No,
Yes.
and I agree, Susan. It goes back to my original concern when we start talking about families here in relationship to the adults. We may be sending a message we don't want to send, and that is that we're going to start we're going to start funding family counseling. To me, a clinician who's working with someone who's 21 years or older will probably draw in caregivers or family or significant others if they are part of the treatment and part of what will be necessary to help this individual regain some mental healthiness.
yeah, I think both of you make a good point on that, so.
As a treatment provider for adults who have fallen the spectrum from severely chronically mentally ill to those who may just be dealing with more of what we used to call access to. So now we're talking about eligible population versus target population individuals. There's a lot of research that, in fact, all of the evidence-based treatment that we provide says that we need to provide integrative services for individuals who are suffering, especially from a chronic mental illness. That doesn't mean that doesn't leave the discretion up to the clinician to say, hey, Mr. Johnson, I see that your mom is really engaging in some highly enabling type of behaviors. Let's get her in to provide her some education about your mental health diagnosis or whatever that might be. So to say that we want to, I understand the points of not wanting to say, well, we're going to start providing family therapy to all of the community, but to specifically exclude and say, no, we're just going to focus on the individual who has a chronic mental illness and not reimburse for services for that who may involve support systems, maybe even caregivers. I've had individuals bring in who are involved in some programs in the community who have case managers that I've brought in and provided education and services to in order to reduce things that we call expressed emotion, and high expressed emotion is directly related to higher rates of relapse for chronic mental illness. So having an integrative approach, I think, and leaving some discretion to the clinician to be able to decide of whether it's appropriate for that individual or not is important. So maybe not saying, hey, we're going to provide all these services for everybody, but identifying the individualized treatment plan and saying that if the individualized treatment plan is necessary, as Amy was saying earlier, everybody presents differently, everybody has different treatment experiences, leaving that discretion up to the clinician to say that we will provide for some, whether it be education or family sessions as needed, is absolutely relevant. And it's very clear in evidence-based treatment that it's important to recovery.
Yeah. And Judy, I'll get you in a minute. And I think, once again, remember, we're not describing the specifics of the program. So it sounds like, when you use the word counseling, it can be any number of things. So
I guess
one particular type of counseling, I think, would maybe not be the way to go with this particular stage of the process. Clearly, when we start to get proposals, we're going to look at how people describe the type of counseling they provide and look at what is the best practices in those areas. So, Judy.
No, I agree. I think that, as I said, I believe clinicians, as has already been expressed, use that kind of discretion and will involve whoever they need to in that case. Hannah, I just wanted to remind people of the last two paragraphs of they printed out on the other side of my document. We really do, not a disclaimer, but we leave it open in terms of, you know, that there will be some, it's not exclusive or an exhaustive list. And I think some of the things that were, and again, just a separate note, the document that Corey created, yay, Corey, how many nights did you sit up 24/7 doing this? But I know Corey, she did it. That there are a number of places in this document where it's very clear that in terms of prevention and promotion of healthiness fall within the public health department's domain. And I would encourage us to have a separate discussion of some of that when it comes to marketing and maintaining and going forward, so that people do understand what we're doing and they do understand the services. I continue to be rather amazed and somewhat concerned with the fact that even with our fine providers in this community, the number of people who do not know that they are there and have less knowledge of what they do. So I think we need to get back into that as a health department too.
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do, so.
Well, and again, I think, so I'm glad Amy highlighted what, thank you, Judy, for reminding us of this, because I think this is so critical, especially that last sentence, efforts must be made to reach a diverse population with a particular focus on those who have been traditionally underserved. I think this is a time when we really are being called to make sure that we really do that. But, and so some of that is outreach. And so again, I think the way we word this, we just need to be careful. While we cannot possibly put in every single, you know, because again, it is professional discretion about how they actually offer the treatments, but, you know, certainly outreach services so that you're going, again, so that it's embedded and you're taking it to where their comfort level is, and it's being provided by others who are culturally and linguistically attuned and all of that. So we just need to make sure we don't leave, you know, we write it so it's understood that there's some, this extends a little farther than, you know, just the exact words here. We don't want to box ourselves in.
Well, and that again speaks to the final paragraph in the document that Hannah provided, where we talk about efforts being made to reach that diverse population. And I think that those two paragraphs should be a part of when we are releasing this information for public dissemination, that we include that.
I would remind you, we have not finished the document above yet. So I think where we are is we've decided not to add the reference to family counseling at this point, and understand that falls within the general category of counseling. So if we call item 4 specialty courts, it seems that some of the language here is not appropriate at this point. So any suggestions? I'm going to ask
Didn't you ask Christine to like put something together for you?
She did. We added that to adult services.
Thank you. Sorry.
So since I think that my understanding of what the group was saying on this was that we were acknowledging that this met specialty court services. So,
Yeah, I think that we can just cut that down to describe specialty courts, basically, drug court and recovery court. I don't, because I don't believe it covers veterans court.
which I don't know why it doesn't. I'm going to ask about that.
I think that we have a grant for that right now.
And I guess the VA is here to do some of that.
And, yeah, there's some other funding for that, I believe.
It does not cover veterans court because veterans has their own funding and their own process and their own services. So it's drug court and recovery court. And just a real quick reminder that that money goes to court services, and then they subcontract that money out to Chestnut. And to Chestnut is to like recovery coaches mainly, and some staffing. And that's about around 180,000 goes to Chestnut. And then about 25,000, and my numbers aren't completely accurate, but around 20 to 25,000 goes to children Youth and Family Solutions, and that is for them to do a group therapy called MRT. And then about 7,000 or 8,000 goes to Center for Human Services, and that's for mental health staffing. And so my question with specialty court services is, so I hear you guys saying that's under a different line item and there's an agreement. Not sure how that agreement works, but there's an agreement. But I guess my question is, we still do have some discretion on what that would look like as far as the subcontracting and what so it's services that are supporting specialty court services. So we're not actually giving the money that stays with court services because they're subcontracting it out to agencies that would help support the individuals in those services. So one of my questions is, as far as like funding staff that is subcontracted, and I know this has come up before, do we want that staff to be a professional staff member that's credentialed in the mental health field, or is it still appropriate for that money to go to a staff member that is more of a peer coach or a peer support individual helping those in mainly drug court?
What's been to this point?
With,
I'm sorry, Judy, I didn't hear that.
Go ahead, Judy.
No, I was curious as to what is the language. We have this in place now, and the courts do subcontract with Chestnut and others. Did we provide the language to those entities that were to be contracted? Did we provide the language with the expectation of what they were to do and who the individuals that they would be receiving reimbursement for their services? Or did we leave that wide open? How have we done it in the past?
So I can't really look. I would have to look at the RFP from last year. Off of my memory, was stating like services that would help support problem-solving courts.
But did we issue the RFP, or did the courts do it?
We issued the RFP, and then court services completed the RFP, but then they collaborated with those 3 agencies to help complete the RFP. And then each of those 3 agencies turned in a budget that outlined what they were going to be using that money towards, and that got turned in with the application. And then
so we need to be more definitive then, probably, no?
I'm sorry, Judy, I didn't hear that.
We need to be a bit more definitive than this, other than just to say it's going to support specialty courts.
Yeah, so that's what I think too, is that we need to have some more, like, I understand, like, we don't want to box people in, but in some respect, that's the purpose of the RFP, is to have some parameters. So then it's not just a free-for-all for who can apply for funding, and there has to be some type of boundaries, or else we wouldn't have the different areas.
And let me put my former county administrator hat on here for a moment. This is an unusual one. There is some history to how it came to go to the court services, as opposed to, at one point, agencies did apply for these funds individually for the purpose of serving drug court. And I think it was believed that in order to monitor outcomes and to what have you, it made sense to give the money to the court services to contract for what they felt was unnecessary to operate those programs.
Right.
Amy, I don't think we have ever taken the position that we know better than them, whether peer counselors or, whoever are the appropriate staff. However, it is an interesting situation because we are basically, in some ways, and I guess we can go down this road with RFPs, but it does apply today, I think, to say, we're just asking the county board to say, yes, we still believe that a portion of these monies should be used to fund specialty groups. The details of that are not for us to decide today, and it may be handled in a number of different ways. It, in some ways, doesn't make sense to make a county agency submit an RFP for money that is county money. but that's how it was put together. I don't need to go out any more about how or why that happened that way, but I think the real issue is our recommendation to the county board that one of the 4 priorities for funds, use of these funds, is to fund specialty courts. And obviously, we have what we've known has been done in previous years, and the model used then. And of course, there are national standardized models for these things, and they are accredited. So I think they have to follow those guidelines in operating these programs. So
And the last thing that I would just quickly say about that, even, if we continue to follow the RFP process, and I have a relationship with Michael Donovan, and I think then I don't think that court services realizes that they would be able, that they can change some of that history. So if they feel like their standards are constantly changing, they're in the process. And I think one of the recovery court, I think, got accredited, and drug court is almost accredited, or maybe flip-flop. So those standards are constantly changing. And so if we continue this process with the RFP and we say, court services, the standards, then maybe part of that RFP process could be that they can look, or in this, that it doesn't have to be like any agency could apply that would support court services, the problem-solving courts, versus just the way that it is now. Like it could be open if something different than MRT would work better for them, or they could say, no, we still want to go after MRT. But I think to give court services, like you're saying, Hannah, that ability to say what they think is best based on their evidence and practice, evidence bases and practice bases, then that would be beneficial too.
well, and let me just say before we get too further in, I know our meeting is going long as these tend to do. I think for today, we don't need to really get into that detail, other than, do we want to recommend to the Board of Health that specialty court services be a priority funding area? And I think the committee has indicated that they do. And how we do an RFP or whatever, I see is for another day. And how we describe this, I guess, fits into that. But so I don't know who was first, whether it was Judy or Corey, but Judy says.
Go ahead.
She's claiming first, so Judy and then Corey. No, okay, Corey, sorry.
What if we say something about targeted behavioral health services to specialty courts? What if we make that the category? Targeted behavioral health services to specialty courts? Because if Amy's point is we don't pay for specialty courts, we pay for the behavioral health services that are given to the people that are enrolled in specialty court. So
No,
if we want to make that distinction.
Money to the court, we make a budgetary transfer of funds to court services, and they contract for the services.
Okay. So you're saying we don't need to identify that our monies are supposed to be going for behavioral health services that are given to those people that are in that program, as opposed to paying for the program?
Well, I think in our description, we are saying we understand it's default of mental health services. I think we can put that in the description to indicate that, but I think the category.
I think the point is, Amy's point made sense to me, that we just make sure that our monies are to go to behavioral health related services offered to the people that find themselves in specialty courts.
Right, yes.
I think that they're well aware of that.
So there's a sentence in this document that I drafted which starts, programs in this category include specialty courts. So I think if you want to work with that, we could say programs in this category are operated within the specialty courts and are those intended to ensure the continuum of mental health care, support.
How about the provision of evidence-based treatments? Because again, they do have certain standards that they have to follow. So we want them to be able to ensure those components are in place.
Corey, can I say something on that?
Sure.
And I don't know if we want to put that on this particular one only, because I believe that that is something that is in the whole RFP, so that they have to, every one of these topic areas, when someone applies, has to then identify their evidence-based process programs or whatever, and what they are. So I don't think that we necessarily have to put that just on this one as a broad category, because they're all supposed to do that.
I'm thinking that makes sense. I'm just thinking this is just so specific. The other ones are so broad, and this one's really specific.
Yeah, it is. I think you're right. So I guess, and at the beginning we talked about it, and I just asking again the committee that you do agree that we should call this specialty court services, and in this case, it is very specific to those programs, to the kind of umbrella of specialty courts, and then the funds do get distributed within that program for mental health care and treatment. Yes, no? Here is my suggestion. I'm going to send this document back out with the changes we've made. If you are okay with that, I will try to revise some of the language there to capture, and I think I understand what Amy and Corey are saying, that we want to be clear that we don't just hand them money and then it's used for non-mental health purposes. So that it's given to the courts to support those programs which provide mental health care to the participants. And it may be understood at this point, but it doesn't hurt to have the language in our document. Is that okay with everybody? And you can give it a look and then get back to me if with whatever changes you might want. Okay. So then there are these last two paragraphs which were added. Do we want to include these as part of what we give to the county board? I guess I feel certainly the last paragraph should go along with this, but and I don't know if it needs to be worded more strongly than that, but the other one about, slice and dice, it could be any of these, I'm thinking doesn't need to really be in here. I think we've kind of captured it in our descriptions, but comments?
My vote is for both paragraphs. I think the first paragraph, as you said, excuse me, much of that language is used in others. However, I think it bears repeating that the education, the prevention, and what is listed there is very important. We're sending a message, as well as the second paragraph.
Okay, all right.
I thought those were well done. I want them in there too.
Okay. All right, so any
Good with
other,
them.
I see who's over here in the corner with a green mic on. Carla, yes.
I'm just curious, are you planning on handing this document out at the board meeting or
Well, we
including
can
it in the
email it
packet?
ahead of time. Are we gonna have is a board meeting gonna be Zoom?
No, it's gonna be in person.
Oh, it is, okay. Then I guess we can email
Unless
it.
something no one's told me about.
Carly, didn't you offer us the,
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Okay, so, but Carla, I can,
Thanks
I'll
for
get
telling
this
me.
out so people have a chance to look at it this evening. I know we've got a kind of a quick turnaround. And probably the best is I send it to Amy and she can send it out. And then if you wanna, Amy and I will work together in terms of incorporating changes. if there are any that you want me to add, and then we'll get it out to the board, by Wednesday morning. Carla, is that okay? Yes.
I just wanted to throw out to the Mental Health Advisory Board members, is there anything that, I hope you all understand that these are meant to be broad, and just like that last second to the last paragraph said, they're not meant to be exclusive or exhaustive, but I'm just throwing out to all of you from your wonderful expertise lenses. Is there anything that you're hearing that you're feeling like they're totally missing a particular, something that you have a burning need to tell us we should be specifying?
This is Christine again. My main concern is really that, and I think if we're moving that from section 4 to section 3, my main concern is the deficits in the reintegration services that are really being exacerbated in recidivism rates for our corrections population. So if we're going to focus on that in 3 instead of 4, I do know there is some concerns too about that. We're talking about the last meeting, psychiatric services, so medication management, even if it's associated with case management or mental health individual services, also becoming focused on or addressed within our community in order to really meet the needs of those gaps of services. If we're focusing on that in 3 and just including that continuity of care statement that Hannah wanted me to come up with, making sure that we definitely address some of these gaps in services for our unfunded population, not only those who are in the criminal justice system, but also for those who are they don't have private funding, they don't have Medicaid, they don't have Medicare, making sure that that is absolutely addressed in the next meeting for funding of these services. That's my main goal for today.
Okay, yeah. And I think, Christine, certainly the issue of the lack of psychiatric care is well known, and we just need the right minds together to get this cracked. I mean, we just don't seem to be able to move the needle forward very much on that. So glad to have you aboard and your great ideas. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so are we good? I will take this, get it sent to Amy so that she can forward it out to everybody. Take a look at it, send comments back. Amy and I will work together. And we'll go from there. Now, this was listed as an action item on our agenda. So I guess since we're still fine tuning it, I don't know that we need to actually vote on this. Yes, Susan?
Well, because of what you're just bringing up about the action item. So are we going to vote on this at the Board of Health meeting on Wednesday? So then we have to then actually have to do this action item. But we will get this Wednesday before the meeting. Is that what we're saying? I just want to clarify when we're doing what.
Okay, my intent would be to get this back out this evening. And when you say we, are you talking about the committee or the county, the Board of Health?
Board of Health.
Yeah. Board of Health, I would get it out by Tuesday evening. Since I think we're talking about some fine tuning of the document, not wholesale, so.
And just real quick too, for the Board of Health packet, for the memo or for the action item, I just did a memo. And I think the Board of Health, that action item is just approving the focus areas. So it's just saying these 4 focus areas are approved. And I don't think it's so much having to yet approve all of the logistics under each focus area, is the way that I understood it.
Yeah, I would have thought the Board of Health will get this document as an explanation of those focus areas. And I would think this would be a part of the motion. The logistics will come afterwards.
Yeah.
So we'll get the Board of Health this document. So when the motion is made, it's the 4 areas as described. Because this provides context, and I think they need to do that.
And we have a mental health advisory board on July 17th, and I would definitely love their input on some of the logistics, as we flesh this out a little bit to get the RFPs in order. So just the thought. But yeah, they need I think the Board of Health needs the context of these descriptors to know whether they want to approve these 4 focus areas.
So I would entertain a motion to approve the focus areas as described in this document.
So move.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
So, okay. So we'll
Sorry,
go ahead.
guys. Sorry, guys, and I can't see you, so I'm sorry if I keep interrupting someone. For Julie for taking minutes, can you tell us who,
It was Buchanan moved and Poll seconded.
All seconded.
Buchanan and Paul? Thank you.
All in favor. So-
And all of them are in favor.
Okay, so any other business to come before this committee?
Good
We have-
discussion, everybody.
I can't tell. Do you have something, Susan? Or,
Are you gonna do the minutes too?
oh, thank you. Sorry, I completely forgot that. Yes, we have minutes from our June 4th joint meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved. Carla or Paul?
Second, anybody?
I'll second it, but I have a correction.
So now discussion. Yes, Susan, correction?
Yeah, Amy, the second time my name's mentioned, please correct the spelling.
Any other discussion on the minutes? Then I think who was the mover? I think Buchanan moved. Is that right? Carla moved to approve?
Yes.
Paul moved
Did you
with,
make it?
corrections.
Okay. All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? None. All right, thank you. Thank you, Susan, for that reminder. So, okay, so I think with that, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, Schaefer moved, second by Buchanan. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all the participants. Greatly appreciated to have your there to make sure we're staying where we need to be staying. Thank you.
And just that the final note, as this comes out to you, speaking largely to the Mental Health Advisory Board, please do not be shy about correcting bad terminology, particularly since you're the professionals out there. Better ways of describing programs, etc. So anyway, I will get this to Amy first thing this evening, and then we will get it out to you guys and hopefully get quick turnaround. So thank you very much. And we're all done.